Welcome to Under Pressure, the podcast about becoming better men when it counts. I'm Cody Laughlin.
And I'm Brian Alfaro. Each week, we have honest conversations about building businesses, leading families, carrying responsibility, and the pressure that comes with trying to do all of it well. If that sounds like your world, you're in the right place.
No hype, no pretending we've got it all figured out, just real stories, real struggles, and what we're learning along the way. Let's get into it.
Before we get started, if today's topic resonates with you, you'll probably enjoy The Forge. It's our free weekly newsletter where we share lessons, stories, and practical ideas around business, family, responsibility, and becoming better men. You can join at forgingbettermen.com. Now let's get into it. Every Monday feels like a fresh start until Wednesday shows up. It starts the same. This is the week. I'm going to wake up early. I'm going to hit the gym. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to read a little bit more. I'm going to be more disciplined this week. Then somehow by Wednesday, you're already negotiating with yourself.
The crazy part is, it isn't because you don't know what to do. I believe most people know the basics. Knowledge isn't the problem.
So here's a question I've been wrestling with. Why do so many capable people keep quitting on themselves? Because I don't think it's a motivation problem. I think it's something much deeper. I think we've confused motivation, discipline, and identity. And my hope is that by the end of this conversation, Cody, our audience will stop asking, how do I get more motivated, and start asking much better questions.
Yeah, Brian, to that point, motivation gets you started, but identity keeps you going. And that's what we're going to dive into.
So Cody, we've all been in this situation where we set a goal, or we tell ourselves we want to form a habit, and we start strong, and then things tend to fade. Do you have anything that you've quit that personally has still bothered you to this day? Or are there some examples there that you're thinking of off the top of your head?
Absolutely. I mean, there's many examples, and I don't think that's unique to me. But one thing that I'm notorious for is diving all into a hardcore fitness routine and committing myself fully to completely revamping my physical fitness. And that includes sleep, diet, exercise program. And because I invest so much time and energy into revamping a fitness routine, what I find myself doing is I end up committing fully to this process and this change. And it lasts for a couple months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And what starts to happen is the burnout starts to kick in, and you start having things that pop up that kind of derail you, so to speak, from your plan. And for me, particularly, I'll share my most recent example of this. 2 years ago, I went on a very, I would call it extreme transition from kind of the status quo. You know, I was in the gym consistently. I had a pretty decent diet, but I ended up going completely plant-based, 100% plant-based. I cut out everything that wasn't purely organic or purely plant-based, no alcohol, no chemicals, no preservatives, all the things. And I went on a pretty regimented fitness program where I was getting up at 4 o'clock every morning, cold plunging every single morning, hitting the gym with weight training for an hour, hour and a half. And then midday or end of day, I was doing another 45 minutes to an hour of cardio. And I did this consistently for a year. And the results were incredible. I was so happy with the results. I ended up losing like 30, 40 pounds. I got down to, I think it was like 12% body fat. I was trim. I probably looked the best I've ever had in my life. And I was so excited. I was so proud of myself. And then my wife and I decided to move to a different area of town. And in that transition in that process of moving, I started finding myself making the excuses. Well, I just moved. I'm exhausted from moving. Let me take the day off. We're getting the house settled in. I can't meal prep or do what I need to do for my diet this week. So I'm going to go ahead and just take today off. And doing that enough days in a row, what I found myself doing is falling into this trap of getting away from everything that had worked so well for me over the last 12 months. And it became a snowball. And that snowball started to very, very quickly roll downhill very fast. And all the hard work that I'd put in, all the time and effort I put in, it all fell apart. And so I reverted back to some of the old habits and practices and things like that related to my diet and fitness. that set me back quite a bit. And so that's something that I still to this day drives me crazy because that's a lot of time and effort to put in to get to a point where you're so proud of yourself, and then to let it go was extremely disappointing. So, I know that's something that's not unique to me. Again, I think a lot of people struggle with that. And one of the most common New Year's resolution is people's fit, you know, but yeah, it's so disappointing. But what about you?
Yeah, Cody, versus sharing an example, I actually want to go a little deeper and talk a little bit about how that like psychology has impacted me. And tell me if this is how you felt. I think missing the habit, because I've had those exact examples, right? I've had the gym thing, I've had the waking up early thing, I've had the clean diet thing. I'm a parent now, so there's like this list of things you tell yourself you're going to do on a daily basis, right? And what I've learned is missing the habit isn't necessarily what hurts. It's breaking that trust with yourself because you're looking at yourself in the mirror, so to speak, and saying, "I'm going to do this." And when you go back to that mirror a day later, a week later, a month later, you look at yourself and and whether it's a physical thing or not, you start telling yourself like, man, I knew I'd quit again, right? And I think people don't lose confidence in forming these habits. These habits aren't rocket science. They lose confidence because they fail. They try something, it doesn't work out, and they stop believing in themselves. And every broken promise can, if you're not careful, it can become evidence for these stories that you tell yourself that I don't follow through. I knew I was going to quit. Oh, I knew I wasn't going to lose weight. And eventually that stops becoming something you did and it becomes who you think you are, right? And for my example, to answer your question, I've got all those examples too as well. And I think if you're not careful, you can change the narrative of who you want to become or who you think you were going to become because you continue to fail. You buy into that story that, you start telling yourself like, oh, I'm a quitter. Or when somebody says, why don't you lose weight? You're like, it's not worth my effort. Every time I try, I fail. I have friends and family that have all made that exact comment. I've been there where I'm like, I'm not going to try that because I know I'm going to do it for a week and then I'm going to not do it again. Right. So I think that's the more important point that I want to highlight for versus sharing any particular examples for me is that psychological impact that it has on you when you try something, you fail, and then you feel like a quitter.
Well, and I'll expand on that too, Brian, because I think what you're alluding to is you're describing that trust which is rooted in your identity. How do you see
Hmm.
yourself, and how do you identify yourself? And when you start to disassociate how you identify yourself with the habits that you're doing daily, that's where you start having that breakdown of trust. So most people have an issue with their identity. It's an identity problem. Like you mentioned in the examples where you go and put yourself out there, or you take a step to improve yourself in some way, and it doesn't result in the outcome you're looking for. Well, that feeling of failure, if you say, well, I'm not going to try again in the future because I always fail, well, you're identifying yourself as a failure. That's going to lead then to developing habits and doing and performing habits that make you or lead you to failure. And so it's all about your identity and how do you associate yourself to be. And so when we talk about things like fitness or finances or self improvement, it's not a motivation problem. Most people don't have a motivation problem. They have an identity problem.
So okay, let's talk about why this happens, right? Let's talk about the psychology around why people have this identity problem with not being able to stick to habits or maybe quitting and or starting something and then quitting and then feeling like a failure. And for me, what I've learned, and I still have to remind myself to this day, is I think motivation is a terrible long-term strategy. Because have you ever noticed, very few people actually need motivation to start something. Starting something is often not the thing that we all have an issue with. We start waking up early and we feel really good about it. We get to the gym, we feel really good about it. We start eating better for that 1 day, 2 day, or whatever it is. Motivation tends to show up naturally. The problem is day 30. Research shows that motivation follows action more than action follows motivation. So let's discuss that a little bit. How a lot of us think we need motivation to really get things done, but the truth is we need to take action if we want to find that motivation.
For me, the psychological aspect comes down to you switch from what the underlying challenge or problem that you've identified is that sparks the motivation, that creates the motivation. And then you quickly shift gears to what the end outcome is, or what the desired outcome is. But you forget along the process that you're having to change yourself, you're having to transform yourself in order to achieve that desired outcome. And if you're not willing to reflect back on and remember what it is that sparked this whole transition or transformation for you anyway. For example, we're talking about fitness. Maybe it's a situation where your weight has gotten a little out of control, and maybe you're struggling with diabetes or high blood pressure or, other health concerns. And that becomes the motivating factor to make this lifestyle change and change these habits. But along the way, as we all know, making that transformation is very difficult because you're having to redefine who you are. Again, you're having to redefine that identity for yourself. And in that transformation, in that process, there's a lot of mental exercises you have to go through to help you push through that transition. And when you get solely focused on the end outcome, well, I'm going to lose 50 pounds, and that's all you become focused on, you forget the development in between, which is the most important process. What's the identity that I want to carry with me, and what are the habits do I need to change that will ultimately help me not only achieve the outcome, but maintain it and sustain it?
So Cody, with that, I think you and I, we obviously have a very similar circle and we know some amazing people. We could probably think of some people in our lives that are incredibly disciplined. And we have to ask ourselves, why are they incredibly disciplined? Are they disciplined because they're just naturally disciplined? Or maybe it's because, to your point, when it comes to identity, they see themselves differently than somebody who's maybe trying to start something. So you have, like, for example, somebody, maybe you're trying to become a runner. Let's just use that for example. We had Tony on the show. He's an awesome runner, right? Someone who says, I'm a runner, doesn't negotiate, versus someone who says, I'm trying to run, negotiates constantly. There's a huge difference there, right? So that identity of telling yourself, I'm somebody who goes to the gym, right? Not I'm trying to get motivated and learn to go to the gym, or I'm trying to learn how to work out. You say, no, I'm somebody who works out, or telling yourself, I'm somebody who eats clean, or I'm somebody who's in shape. Even if you're not at that, to your point, even if you're not at that goal yet, you haven't hit that desired weight, you don't have a 100% clean diet, maybe you're not 100% on your morning routine yet, but just telling yourself and adopting that identity. I'm a morning person. I'm somebody who's in shape. I'm somebody who goes to the gym. I'm a runner. I'm an athlete. I'm somebody who takes care of their body. Telling yourself that from the beginning, before you even get started, allows you to adopt that identity that you're talking about versus being somebody who's maybe chasing the end goal and assuming they're kind of going to get there along the way and not enjoying the journey along the way as well.
So Brian, let's expand on that a little bit further, and let's talk about then what does it mean to then create identity-based habits? Because I think that's what we're really started to focus on now, is getting away from decision fatigue and all of the multiple different decisions you have to make throughout the day, especially when it comes to redefining your identity and developing what we call the habit loop, right? A set of habits or daily things that, like you said, are non-negotiable. These are things that every single day, no matter what, these are your non-negotiables that you perform on a daily basis, and they're unbreakable. And you commit yourself to those and you incorporate those into your goal setting. So that way you know that moving forward, this is part of who you are. This is part of who you identify as every single day.
Cody, for that habit loop, I think about creating habits, and one of the things I think is really important if you're trying to create that habit loop of good routines that you do is making sure you craft or curate your environment to set yourself up to win, so that you don't get decision fatigue. We all make 1,000 decisions, actually probably more a day when it comes to every facet of our life. What time we wake up, what we wear to work, or what we do, eat for lunch, all these different things that we make decisions on. What we don't want to do is at the end of the day or in the middle of the day, when we start feeling some sort of fatigue for making decisions, is set up our environment to fail. So for example, who's going to avoid eating the cookie, the guy with the cookie in the glass jar on the counter, or the guy that doesn't have any cookies in his house? Or who's going to go to the gym, the guy that sets out all his gym clothes in the morning before he even goes to bed so that when he wakes up it's easy, or the guy that has to find all his gym clothes, get everything ready, then get in the car and go to the gym? It's likely the latter on both, the person who sets himself up for success. So I think if you're creating these habit loops and these things you want to do on a daily basis, you want to build these routines that help make good decisions when you're in that fatigue state, so you don't have to think about these good habits that you're trying to form.
And let's touch base again on something that you opened the show with, which is motivation. I think we have a false presumption that motivation will carry us through whatever challenges we face, and it'll carry us through to achieving our desired outcome. But we have to destroy this belief that motivation creates that consistency, because that we all know that's false. So what we're discussing, Brian, is how do we put systems in place that tie in these habits, these newly formed habits, in a way that, like you said, removes all the decision fatigue, removes all the decision making, it removes all of the barriers, and it creates a process that we follow on a day to day basis, right? The systems create the consistency, not the motivation. And the identity is what keeps that system alive.
Cody, for these systems that you're talking about, one of the things I want to highlight, I think is important when you're building these systems and you want to form these good habits that help strengthen your identity and help protect your identity is this sounds really weird when you hear it for the first time out loud, but you want to keep things really simple and lower the standard. Make it easy to be successful, make it easy to win so you never miss twice. If going to the gym, waking up early is something that you're striving to do, you have to set yourself up for success. Set multiple alarms earlier than you know you need to. Set out your shoes, set out all your gym clothes. I sometimes, I know when I was first starting to go to the gym and trying to get more motivated, I would sleep in my gym clothes. So you literally wake up, get out of bed, put your shoes on, run out the door. There is no, oh, let me go find my clothes and try to get ready and all that, right? I'm lowering the entry point, lowering the standard, making it really easy. Again, designing my environment to try to win in that case. So that's just one example, I think, of when you're building systems of something you can do because you want to form that consistency loop. You want to start doing it over and over and over again. And if you're not doing these little things to set yourself up to be consistent, you're going to miss the mark. You're going to not be able to form that habit, which again starts to create that identity crisis to where you feel like, oh man, here we go again. I tried to do something, I wasn't able to do it, and now I quit.
I want to challenge you a little bit, Brian, though. Let's talk about that first point that you made, lowering the standard, because I think that's contradictory to a lot of highly successful people, whether it be it fitness, entrepreneurs, finances, a lot of people that you and I follow, a lot of, we've relied on these as kind of quote unquote indirect mentors. But there's this belief from highly successful people that you should create these big goals. You should create these big dreams, make your dreams so big that they feel untouchable. But what we're talking about now of lowering the standard seems to be in conflict with that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you want to create the small version of any habit. And I know people say, hey, create these massive goals, right? Like we keep talking about working out, but like if you wanted to do push-ups, for example, if you've never done push-ups in your life, saying, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to do 100 push-ups, guess what? You're probably not going to do 100 push-ups, but maybe you can do 5 push-ups. Maybe you can do 10 push-ups. Same thing. If you want to go for a walk, if you're not somebody who exercises and walks a lot or runs a lot, don't say, hey, today I'm going to walk 5 miles and I'm going to walk for an hour or 2 hours. I'm going to take a 10-minute walk. I'm going to take a 5-minute walk. These are little wins that start to help you build momentum. We talked about earlier how most people don't have motivation issues. They have action issues. They're just not taking enough action. And it's not always about taking massive action. Again, you don't have to go from 0 to 100. Taking any type of action is a win when you're trying to form a habit, and things tend to grow over time. So yeah, there's these sort of misnomers that you need to, aim big, aim high, go big or go home, cold turkey something if you're somebody who's maybe trying to eat better or you're trying to remove alcohol from your life. Yeah, you have all these, big influencers that say just, hey, just cut it out, just start doing it tomorrow. But I think we've all learned that the reality of life is, especially when you're, in your mid 30s and your 40s, you've got family, you've got habits, changing these things and forming this new identity of who you want to become from the beginning is much harder than it seems. And action and small wins tend to produce better long-term results than big home runs out the gate.
Here's how I see it, Brian. I think of it when think of the example of Mount Everest. When you go to climb Mount Everest, nobody just shows up at base camp at Mount Everest and says, okay, I'm going to go hike to the peak today. I'll be back in a couple of hours. So when I think about goals, you can do both. I think both can be true at the same time. You can set a big, massive goal for yourself, something that seems so scary, the big, hairy, audacious goals. That's the peak of Mount Everest. But along the way, when you climb Mount Everest, you start at base camp. And when you get to base camp, I believe you spend 6 weeks there training at that altitude to prepare your body for the stress it's about to go under to make that climb and to get to the peak. But along the way, there's 2 additional stops along the way to get to the peak. So it's not just a steady straight climb up, right? You're getting to the next stage and then the next stage before you make that final ascent to the peak. And so when I think about this example and to kind of recap a lot of what we discussed already is it's okay to have a big, hairy, audacious goal, but it's important to make sure that you have also goals, smaller goals in between there that act as kind of milestones for your development that you can track, that you can work towards, that seem much more manageable. Like you said, kind of lowering that standard to make it more manageable, knowing that every step that you take, every day that you push forward, every time that you hit that milestone, you're getting one step closer to that much larger goal, that much bigger peak, so to speak, at the end. So it's all about the psychology, right? It's about the action that you take that you need to take daily to get to the ultimate goal.
So with all that being said, Cody, I want to have a quick debate here. Does discipline beat motivation? You talk about climbing Mount Everest and this, BHAG, big hairy audacious goal. We're talking about a lot of things that have to do with discipline, but we've also talked about motivation. I think a lot of our audience, including myself, feel like sometimes we need a little bit more motivation when I would argue that I actually think we just need more discipline. And if we're talking about forming identities and who we're going to be and telling ourselves we are this particular person, what do you think? Does discipline beat motivation?
Yes, but I think you still need both. I do think you need both. To your point, there's going to be days where you're not going to feel motivated at all. You're not going to feel inspired at all to get up and go do the hard things, whether that's getting up in the morning, going to do a tough workout, making the hard financial decision, maybe having that hard conversation with your wife that you've been putting off for a long time. We've talked about that before. You're never going to have all the motivation you need to be able to face those challenges. It's going to take the discipline and the habits that you've developed through this identity reformation to propel you and push you forward. But I do think without motivation, you're also not inspired to work towards whatever it is, whatever the goal is. And I think when you look at challenges, you look at certain circumstances, there's usually something that is inspiring you again or motivating you or propelling you to make this identity change, to make this transformation, right? There's an underlying something there that is usually the driving force behind why are you all of a sudden having this internal challenge and struggle with yourself. And so I think for me, discipline definitely does beat motivation, and you need that to be able to sustain long term, but both need to exist and coincide with one another. So Brian, that's my point of view. And I know you were briefly touching on your viewpoint on discipline, but give me more, like tell me more about your thesis, whether or not discipline beats motivation.
Cody, I think discipline is built on boring days. I think discipline's way more important than motivation. You mentioned motivation sometimes needed to get started, and I think some people just lack motivation. We've all met those people in life that say they want to do something and never seem to drum up the motivation to get started. So you just got to push yourself to do it, even if you don't have motivation. If you're waiting for somebody to come motivate you to get in shape, good luck. If you're waiting for somebody to come motivate you to start waking up early, well, nobody's gonna be ringing a bell at your head at 3 in the morning to get you up. You can't really muster up that motivation sometimes, so you just have to do it. And I know it's like hard advice to swallow for some people. It's like you just got to do it. But like I said, discipline is built on boring days, and what I mean by that is you're gonna have some days that you don't have motivation, or maybe that's every day for some people on here, and you're gonna have days where the hard work is required and things are really challenging. And those are the small habits and the small things that you do, and the setting yourself up for success, which we've talked about today. Those are the boring days, and you're not going to feel the victory or the wins that you think you're going to achieve, like when you leave the gym for the first time, or when you step on the scale and you feel like you've lost 5 pounds, or when you look at your bank account and you have more money. You'll feel a little sense of victory or win there, but really you have to keep going. You have to keep pushing forward, and that's where the discipline to focus on your identity and the discipline to focus on the habits you're trying to form, in my opinion, become way more important, because at a certain point, you don't need motivation anymore once it's a habit, right? But what you do need is the discipline to continue that habit. And that's why I think the discipline is even more important. And if you can muster up the ability just get started and to focus more on the discipline of continuing that habit, that's what allows you to maintain that success long term. Because as I mentioned, after a while, you're not really going to need motivation. If you're somebody who goes to the gym 5 days a week and wakes up early, you really don't need motivation to keep doing. What you need is discipline to keep doing it.
Okay, so Brian, so with that then, what if you're listening to this show today and you're saying, "Hey, this is speaking to me. I'm struggling with this, or I want to make these changes in my life." What would be some of the things that you would suggest, maybe a habit that somebody can do on a daily basis for the next 7 days to help them begin this transformation process?
I don't want to necessarily focus on like a particular habit. What I want to focus on, Cody, is like the framework and whatever that habit is for you that you know you need to form: eating better, waking up early, going to the gym, reading, cutting back on social media, cutting back on technology, whatever the habit is you're trying to form as part of your new identity, which we've been talking about. Choose whatever that habit is. And for the next 7 days, which is a realistic target for most people, just 1 week, make it impossible to fail. Set yourself up for success and make it impossible for you to miss that goal. So do the little things in your environment, like we've been talking about, to where you never miss twice, right? You don't ever miss the opportunity to wake up early. You don't ever miss the opportunity to go to the gym. You don't ever miss the opportunity to eat a good meal. So set yourself up for success. And I think setting that framework for our listeners and thinking more about the framework that you need to be successful versus the actual habit that you need to be successful. Again, we're talking about, and we've been talking about, not habits for the show. The theme of this show is the identity, who you need to become to be disciplined, to have the motivation, to continue the habits that you want to be successful in whatever area of life we're talking about. So thinking more about the framework, I think, is more important for our listeners. So I would challenge them to, yes, you want to think about a habit and part of who you want to become to stick to that habit, but think more about the framework that you need to be successful long term.
I would challenge the listeners to choose your words carefully. And what I mean by that is, again, if you're thinking about how you identify yourself, if you're identifying yourself or you're telling yourself, well, I'm not going to set my alarm for 4:30 because I know I'm not going to get up. Or if I'm not going to do X because I know I'm just going to fail at it. You're already preconditioning your mind, your subconscious, to believe that you can achieve that. So it's important that you remember the story you tell yourself matters much more than the habit you missed. So if you're redefining your identity and you're really starting to focus on the framework, as you mentioned, and creating these new habits, it's important that you're also programming your subconscious to believe in your identity and these new habits you're forming. So choose your words carefully and make sure that you're also conditioning your mindset, conditioning your subconscious to align with the new identity. I am going to get up at 4:30 because I am going to become the man that I need to become. I am going to lose 10 pounds over the next 2 months. You have to be able to use the correct words and use the correct story to program your mindset to allow yourself to change and go through that transition.
So, Cody, I want to leave our audience with one thought. Your life doesn't change the day you get motivated. You don't all of a sudden wake up and have a life changing motivational experiences. It changes the day you start believing your own words again. So stop calling yourself lazy. Stop calling yourself undisciplined. Stop telling yourself you're someone who never follows through, because every time you say those things, you're reinforcing the very identity you're trying to escape. And you're not one decision. You're not one missed workout. You're not one bad week. You are your identity. You are your habits, and you are what you tell yourself. So focus more on what you're telling yourself if you're trying to become this new person and form these new habits.
Appreciate you being here with us. Stay connected by joining our weekly newsletter called The Forge, delivered straight to your inbox with thoughts on business, work, family, and becoming a better man. Make sure to check out forgingbettermen.com to sign up. If this show hits home for you, then hit the follow button and leave us a review to help us reach more guys who would benefit from it. This is Under Pressure.